I always wanted to dance to that music, but anyways, my name is Matt Perez. We're here in rHatchery Live today with my partner Jose Leal and Dawna Jones, and I've known Dawna for a long time. She's a really good person, and she's into professional. She started as a professional facilitator, and but it's more into finding breakthroughs with people now, and it comes from a lot of experience, and so teaching adaptability, opportunities, and stuff like that, and finding those breakthroughs that that people don't know they want. So with that, I'll leave it up to Donna to explain what she does, a little bit about her business, and then about 10-15 minutes into it, we'll try to see how that couples with the craziness that we came up with, the radical and all that stuff. Okay?
Thank you. You'd like me to start, or Jose, do you want to?
No,
frame it?
the only thing I throw in there is I personally love the personal stories. So as much as you feel comfortable sharing, I think that's
right.
important because we want to understand you, not just what you do, but who you are. And I think that's key.
Thank you. Well, I mean, to me, that's the key question is who do you become through the experiences you've had in life? And that was sort of a question that I asked myself every time I had a setback, and there were a lot of them. And I realized there was a lot of them because I thought differently. Now, I didn't get that initially at all. I just thought the same as everyone else. So I thought I would look at things and I think, well, this is obvious. Let's just do it that way. And in this case, I'm referring to really adapting, business thinking, adapting to fit the context we're in, because for a long time, business thinking was very linear, still is very linear, analytic. If we do this, this will happen. Very predictable, very controlled, engineer outcomes, all of those things. And so in my facilitation work, which cut across all these different sectors, you could really see where that wasn't working at a cultural business culture point of view, because they were forcing outcomes that obviously didn't fit the humanity of the situation, nor the longevity of the situation. Is this going to last, or is it going to just be a temporary Band-Aid fix because it's easy and all of that, and we could do a photo op out of it, for example. So my experience then as a facilitator was, I equate it to being like in a learning lab. You're just in a lab with every team. I was in construction, policy, public consultation, strategy, a variety of different kinds. I did a lot of interactive games in the work I did. And you just watch, there's two parts of you. There's self as witness. There's, what's going on in me, because if I can't handle that, then I can't adapt to the situation I'm in. Nor can I help the people, the group itself as it's moving through something, because I could be the problem. So I have to, observe myself all the time and see, there's a little bit of a toggle switch between my observing and also being in the dynamic and working with it. So I came to see, long story short, this kind of work as basically being about energy and how we use it. Conflict could be used for separation, for force, for desperation. Equally, it could be used for beautiful creative purposes if we were aware of that and made a more intentional choice. So the longer, the segue then is how do you, like in my case, what I did was put a lot of programs together that I thought would be logical for personal growth, business growth, because it's personal growth for business, essentially. It's fractal. What we do at the personal level applies at the organizational and team level. It's just different scale, essentially. And there was just like crickets. There was nothing going on. So that's when I started the podcasting in 2008. And I will share that I became homeless in 2009. And when I hit the road, it was for 9 years. I wrote Decision Making for Dummies on the road. I wrote a couple of contributions to 3 different books: The Intelligence of the Cosmos with systems theorist Ervin Laszlo, a chapter in From Hierarchy to High Performance with the Great Work Cultures team, and then another chapter in another book. And I blogged, And the reason why I did that is having had experience with dark emotions, and as a deep thinker and a sensitive individual, I learned how sensitive later. But when you don't know that, you just know you have to do something other than get depressed. And so biologically, expression is the antidote for depression. And when I figured that out, I thought, okay, I can just write. It's write, produce, create, and that will solve two problems at once. First, it gets me feeling like I'm making a contribution and providing some value, and it also prevents me from sliding down that dark, slippery slope. So today, what the work is about is about that core level of emotional health. How do we stay well emotionally when faced with really complex, challenging conditions without running back to the comfort zone where we can stagnate, where, it's easy to be stagnant. Stability equals stagnation sometimes. It isn't always the comfort zone. It's sometimes just flat stagnation. And how do we actually work with the conditions that we've got to become more fulfilled, live a fulfilling life and contribute a very high level of value to what happens next in our future. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Does that give an overview? How do you feel about that?
Yeah. So you learn from your experience, bad as it was, and you managed to get out of it, and that's more than amazing. That's reminds me of the story about J.K. Rowling's. She wrote these books and all that stuff. That she was also homeless and living off the charity and stuff like that, and but she turned it around, and you turned it around. That's more than any of us experience, and that's commendable. And so one thing that you mentioned, we were talking before, was that taught you how to observe carefully, not only you, but the dynamics of what's going on. And then you teach that adaptability to people. How does that work?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because my facilitation skills, unknown to me, were actually it's like a training ground for more personal navigational skills. I mean, personal, but I could only take a group as far as I could take myself. So if I ran into a conflict in the group, I had to be able to step back from that conflict and not get pulled in. I had to be able to detach and observe in order to support moving through it, moving through the fear, moving through the tension, moving through the positional stances that people had, finding ways to unlock that so there could be more compassion and more understanding, and then we could really get somewhere. So that basic toolkit was a fundamental starting kit, and then what got added to it in the course of the setbacks, and I mean, my operational thing in the middle of a setback would be, okay, this is not fun, not having a good time here, and I'm responsible for that. I just have to figure out how and what I did. I mean, I full responsibility for it. And how do I move through it? Because if I can successfully move through this, then this can serve someone else. So if there's not some higher purpose to what I'm experiencing or anybody else is experiencing, if there's not some value that can be gleaned from it, then it's a lot easier to slide down the dark slope into the darkness. And so, essentially the work today is about, let's just use the skills we have. We're busy deferring to AI for our thinking and deferring to a lot of other places for it, but we cannot defer the feelings. We cannot defer the emotional health. We cannot defer the need to actually work directly with how we're feeling. That's what sets us apart. I mean, we're complex beings. That's the reality. So working with our emotions more directly is the way to forge ahead from my point of view and be very adaptable. Obviously, emotional and mental health are deeply entangled, but emotional health from an evolutionary perspective is what keeps you, what keeps you alive. It's a servant to your intuition. And if you can't hear that, then you really don't have the survival instincts you need. So that's essentially how I see it now. So what I'm about to be sharing in the new year is very much around how do you coach yourself through these things? How do you work? It's developing a much higher level of self-awareness, but also contextual awareness, because certain contexts, like the ones we're in, are perfect training grounds for doing things differently. They're perfect training grounds for trying something else instead of falling back into the old habits. And to be honest, that doesn't matter whether it's a personal thing or an organizational thing. Organizations have deep ruts in their systemic habits, and the invitation is the same for them. It's a harder one to respond to because it takes a much higher level of individual and collective leadership. Yeah. But it is essentially the same thing. So if it goes back to what Jose and I talked about in an episode we did, it's about using fear not to pull back on innovation, not to be, run backwards from any bold moves, but to use fear as the powerful energy it is to move through it. Yeah.
Yeah. A long time ago, I learned to listen to the little voice in my head as okay, I won't do that. I will do something else. And right now, I have cancer. As I'm speaking to you, I have cancer. And I just told this guy that I was talking to, and he started, he wanted me to cry. I don't know what he wanted, but he wanted me to cry and be, keep your hopes up. And I go, I don't need hopes. I'm alive. I'm going to be alive. And the worst that can happen is I can die. Big deal. So yeah, no, I understand some of what you're going through. So tell us about what you're going to do about coaching yourself and
well, I mean, I think what you just did in saying that, Matt, is an important aspect of it, because I've seen people who have had their I called it life's interruptions. Life is all smoothing along and running along in routine, and then bam, something happens, whether it's a pandemic or cancer in your case, which I'm obviously not happy to hear about that. But either way, it's do I accept the reality I'm being faced with, or do I fight with it? And a lot of people invested much time in fighting with it. It was, well, we just need to get back to normal. We just need to run back to the familiar. We just need to do anything but work with it. And I think we have to work with it. We have, in order to move through it with any kind of integrity, with any kind of self-actualization, leadership aspirations, with any kind of goals in mind, we've got to move through it. We've got to accept it for what it is, and then you can work with it. So you've just beautifully given a wonderful example of how to accept it and then work with it.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I finished the third book, and life goes on until it stops, and then it goes on for other people. So I'm not particularly broken up or anything. It's more of, like you said, it's the bam happened, and just accept it for what it is. We're at the 15-minute mark. So do you understand radical and where we're coming from and all that stuff?
Well, if it's the same conversation that Jose and I had some time ago on radical purpose on my episode, on my podcast, yes. Yeah.
Well, this goes beyond the purpose of the individual. Right. This applies to organizations, which is made up of an individual, and it's really an alternative to the current system. And the current system is what we call the fiat system, which is based on fear. It's strictly based on fear. Move that box from there to here to there. Why? Because I say so, or else. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And you may say it with a nice face, oh, because I say so. You may adorn it as you want to, but It's the fear of losing your livelihood. It's the fear of ending homeless. It's the fear of I'm going to lose the familiar. I'm going to lose the stuff that I'm used to, and it's that fear that I hold over you. So, and that's the whole system. Everything that's happening, it revolves around that. And so we came up with it's an alternative, which is based on a very simple foundation, either 3 or 5 things, depending on your count, and that's it. The rest of the richness of it comes out of people. So, but it gives you a foundation not to fall back. That would help you not to fall back. If you choose not to, if at the end you choose to go back, then hey, you go back. But it gives you the tools to not go back. And from purpose and stuff like that, we picked up other tools as well. So we get to introduce each other. I hate to use the word correctly, but correctly.
Yeah.
And in order to help each other.
If I could jump in here, because what you described, Dawna, the work of communicating with people and teams and doing the facilitating that often isn't well done because we don't listen enough. We're always so busy trying to fix, trying to do, being fearful and everything else. My question to you as it relates to radical, as Matt just pointed out, is that for us, the reason we called it radical is everything we do in work has a root in us. It's rooted in ourselves. Every effort we've made, every intention we have, every behavior we do is rooted in us. And so the question that I have for you is, in your work of facilitation, how do you see that manifest itself in both the positive and the negative conflicts, behaviors, actions, outcomes that with the teams that you work with?
Well, that's a big question.
It's a huge question.
So I'll have a shot. I mean, as I mentioned, when I was in the room facilitating, I would notice that I was getting intuitive hits. I was getting visuals coming from the group. And it would be almost like they'd hit a certain point and then they'd stop. And there wasn't, there was something blocking them. And it wasn't until I kind of started perceiving more deeply, just saying, okay, what's going on here? What's behind that? And it could be anything from, gee, we love coming up with generating actions, but none of us want to do any of this stuff, which was the stuck point. Or it could be there's a process in place, nobody's paid attention to it, and it's still blocking things. So, one of my favorite examples was I was at a sales event one time, and I'm terrible at sales, so I went there to hopefully have some of it rub off on me. And I was talking to somebody, and they said, if I do nothing today, I make 1 cent more than I did last year, and they've just revamped the whole sales process. So this is where these underlying processes just run the show, and no one's paying attention because they are in love with the process and not with the results, not with paying attention to what it's doing. So, I mean, you had a group of salespeople are just saying, hey, I can see what this is doing. I'm out of here. I don't need to be a part of this. And so that's the one part of it was, paying attention. It's a universal principle. It's been around since, before certainly our the modern, long before modern times. It is a universal archetypal principle. Pay attention to what has heart and meaning. And when I started working with those universal principles, then I began to see patterns in a whole new light, because it gave me a way to understand we've got these processes that are driving certain outcomes, but they're not outcomes that are A, going to last, or B, they don't have the support of the people who they're going to be impacting. Worse, they're going to harm the people that are, being impacted. And so when all it takes is one anchor principle like that, and you all of a sudden, or at least I began to see, there's some interesting patterns here. So pattern spotting, which is a flow state outcome as well. I didn't realize that then, but I've since learned that. But it's very handy for seeing what are the things that these processes are generating that nobody's paying any attention to. They're just letting them run on autopilot because they're you set them up, you put them in place, and then you forget about them. And it's kind of like when you're first learning how to drive, you're very intentional and conscious about, yes, I do this, and I turn, and all those things. And then after you've driven for a while, you forget the whole thing. And sometimes you even forget how you got to a destination if you've been doing it over and over again. Your subconscious does the driving for you.
Exactly. And you just hit on what Matt was just referring to very clearly. Meaning, right? You talked about, it's about the meaning, right?
Yeah.
And for us, there's another. You talked about impact, which of course it's also about, because you need to focus on what it is that is the outcome of what's happening, right? Because if you don't focus on the outcome, then you end up going through the motions simply for the sake of having a system continue itself, not because you know what the outcome is. But the other that we speak to is belonging.
Right.
Because when we're together, if we're not paying attention, not only to the meaning, but also to the belonging, then again, our focus is on the system and not on each other, not on ourselves, not on each other.
Yeah.
And so your focus that you've just mentioned about how we're so fixated on letting the system do its thing that we don't pay attention to ourselves or each other, or the meaning that we are supposedly making, and maybe not, right?
Well, exactly. And I mean, can I answer a question I see Sam posting there?
Sure.
Yeah, Sam's got a question about pattern spotting versus unintended consequences. Pattern spotting, to me, in my experience, is that place where things are just being done over and over and over again, and it's a habit, essentially. It's a habit that's been formed. So when I wrote Decision Making for Dummies, I went down, was wandering around because I could, and I went down and I met with a consultant who'd spent about 1,000 hours in organizations, and he said, I can tell in 15 minutes what this company is going to do next because their decisions have a pattern. And this is what it is. Similarly, there's risk aversion patterns that you can see in more conventional companies who are afraid of loss. So, and I mean, psychologically, all humans are, but companies have the same fractal pattern as well. They be fear loss the more established they get. So that's what I mean by pattern spotting. Unintended consequences is you make a decision, you consider impact. And I think what humans are really good at is we're good at saying, well, if we do this, then this will happen. So that's direct impact. What we're terrible at is, and fair enough, because it's complex, but what we're not particularly good at is observing the unintended consequences. And when we do observe them, we're starting to move into systems thinking. We're starting to see the complexity in the environment we're in. And that is, I think, very exciting because it helps us see, using a much wider lens. You can't be, if you spot those things, if you say, that's an unintended consequence, it could be negative, it could be positive, it could be neither. It could just be whatever it happens to be, but it is the place where you think, didn't expect that to happen. Let's watch and see what else emerges, because now we're starting to talk about emergent results in any given system. So I hope that helps answer Sam's question. Great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
I hope that helps
Sam.
answer it.
So happens that Sam is a friend from high school.
Oh,
look at that.
I love it. That's fantastic.
Thank you for joining us, Sam, and for your question. You know what you just said, Dawna, reminds me of this doctor. It was John Gottman, who he could tell when a couple comes in. He was a couples therapist researcher, and a couple would come in and he'd ask one question they would look at each other in a certain way and he'd go, yeah, they're about to get divorced. 90% accuracy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just because he could read the patterns. Right. And the
Yeah.
pattern he then described, as you said, you feel the pattern first and then you describe it later.
Yeah.
The pattern he then described was they had lost respect for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that happens in our workplace as well. And I think that's the belonging piece, right? Where we start to focus so much on getting it done and on the system that we lose sight of the fact that we're picking up patterns from each other and we're not listening.
Right. That's beautifully said. I mean, I have this thing called signals and cues. That's, as a facilitator, any environment I'm going into. And I mean, bear in mind, I don't have to be in a formal facilitation role. I just am a nerd about observing these things. So I'll be going into any particular environment and I'm looking for signals and cues. What are the signals that give me a cue as to what's going on? And my optimum visual for adaptability is a murmuration. The sandpipers do it, and they're always paying attention to these subtleties. And yet I've never seen one, like if you look at how we describe that, it's like don't hit anyone would be the fourth step in the sequence. And like they're flying it, so it's the signals and cues that you're picking, and that's a very sensory intelligence. It's not an intelligence that comes from mentally running through data sets or anything like that. This is what humans can do that tech will never be able to do, because we're still figuring out how to just drive like a human. So, we've got a long way to go to duplicate that level of sophistication in being able to perceive reality and make sense out of it pretty much simultaneously. So, he's picking up, knowing it or not, he's picking up on the cues, that the signals and cues that tell him exactly what loss of respect looks like in a relationship. And he's seen it so many times, and it's a strong pattern. It's not a lightweight one.
Right.
He knows exactly what's going to happen next. So that's, yeah.
And that's obviously a pattern that we see in the workplace and in teams and groups.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So if I can jump in, what's next for you? What's the future? What, I know it's not in the moment, but what is coming for you?
Thanks, Matt, for asking. Well, I mean, I had another setback in January of last year where I had a brain bleed, and I came out of that. I'm still alive, so that's great. And that's when I came out with a much higher level of sensitivity, which is good news, bad news. Good news is it's a lot easier to do certain things. Bad news is it's a lot harder to manage life, as you just have more work to do. But the next step then, what that means is I'm doing a lot more online work, some in person, but I'll do more online work. And I'm, launching, as I say, I'll launch this program. Ultimately, it'll be called Adaptive Minds, but the beginner part of it, the emotional health mastery section of it, which is basically relevant to anybody who is ready to admit they have emotions and want to be responsible for them. That's the next step. Let's start, because if you look at the thinking skills as complexity increases, these are they. Dave Snowden's Kinefin model on the 4 quadrants. There's one word in each of the 4 quadrants that describes the different context, and that word is sensing. And we're not using that. I mean, those of us that have done that are doing it, but most people are just trying to get through with their mind. And there's this whole other dimension of something. We don't talk about that because, that's soft skills. Well, typically it's soft skills because they're hard to master. So if you, it's a great way of saying, I don't want to do that. That looks hard. But it is time for the hard stuff. It is time for really learning how to work with what we're really good at as humans, because the tech will look after the rest.
Yeah, we're one of the things in our foundations is decentralization and transparency, and that sounds like transparency to me.
Yeah.
And transparency not only I got this much money in the bank, but transparency also of what I'm feeling. You did this and you did that, and I interpret it this way, and I'm feeling bad because whatever. That's important to know. I mean, organizations are made up of people. That's the bottom line. And in the end, organizations cannot be better than people. So they're very good at being worse than people, but they can be better. They cannot.
It's a great way of putting it. I'm mindful of the team IQ, where you put a whole bunch of people in the room and the team IQ goes down versus put a bunch of people in the room and the team IQ goes up. So it's really, how do we become better at working with diversity? I think one of the things that happened, that when I realized it later, I thought, oh my gosh, all this conflict resolution stuff means that they weren't utilizing conflict to deal with difference at all. They were trying to get, generally these practices, and I took mediation and understood it and said, I don't want to do that. I want to work with people when they're still wanting to be in the room, and we can still have conversations and arrive at a level of understanding. So I think that's the other part of it. We're moving from conflict resolution into conflict utilization. How do we use this so that we can work with these phenomenal diverse perspectives and really make things better, not only for team thinking, because you need to have that, otherwise you've just got group think going on, and or at an organizational level, where we've got certain things that need to be absolutely routine and stable, and then other things that need to leap off the innovative edge, the company will die. So I think there's an opportunity to really use the diversity of perspectives and thinking that we have in the room, in the organization, in society, to do much better things than we're currently doing.
Great.
I was just going to say, Matt, if you don't mind, I have one more question, or were you going to wrap it up?
I was going to announce next week's guest. Go ahead.
Because I think, Dawna, there's another thing that I'd like to say that I know you're involved in a big way. And we had a little bit of a back and forth on LinkedIn last week about this, or maybe even this week, I can't recall, about the work of the future of work and the groups that are out there working on this, and the idea of starting to work together in a more powerful way. And I loved the fact that you suggested some folks pay attention to that conversation, but also the questions you posed. And maybe you can speak to that a little bit, and what your thoughts are about the idea of how are you seeing the need, not necessarily how it's going to happen, but what do you see as the need of different groups working together in this emerging way of working that isn't the current way of working?
If I can, reframe it in terms of, we're often, especially on LinkedIn, there's all this competitive stuff. You see a lot of competition, and you see it in the mindset of business as well. Competition can be used to advantage if it's used to collaborate, if it's used for, looking like using it, setting it up as a constraint, but for a higher goal, for a higher purpose, a much higher purpose. So in terms of going back now to the question, I can't remember what I asked on LinkedIn at all, but I do know that everyone is coming at it through a different lens. And I don't think we need anything organized at all. I think what we do need to know is who's doing what and what are the strengths of that, because there's some synergies there that could quite organically be combined. Again, as soon as you formalize anything, it usually sends these networks underground. They just go down. That's not the goal. Mm-hmm. The goal is not to formalize, in my mind. It's more a matter of, it's a very loose, informal, here's what we're working on, here's what value it has, here's how it contributes, and that kind of an approach, so that, in certain environments, you can say, gosh, this is the perfect place for this. This is the perfect place, time, and stage for that kind of thinking to come in, because this is what's needed here at the moment. So I think, you know, the diversity of thought that we are blessed with in terms of the complexity of being human is not being used to the extent it can be. I mean, to a fair amount, I think there's been some delegation of thinking to somewhere else. I mean, whether it's AI or just some, you know, oh, the government needs to do that because they're the grown-ups and they're supposed to make these sound decisions, and they're not equipped for it either. I mean, from a you know,
even less so.
Less so, yeah. From a bifurcation level, they don't have the thinking. The institutions are extremely old, and so there needs to be an upgrade there. So I think the change in the leadership and how leaders take about is not going to be one, you know, it's not going to be the spider with the head. It's much more of a starfish. That metaphor was in a book a long time ago and I loved it, but it's more of a starfish, decentralized and distributed frame, you know, distributed mechanism or distributed organism is the right word I'm looking for.
Yeah. And just to bring you to that moment, it was a conversation between Stelio and Niels about how, you know, how do we start talking to each other and how do we start working with one another? And I think the fact that you jumped in, I appreciated that. That was good. It's nice to have another voice that agrees with what you just said, and I think that's important.
Thank you.
So the thing I would invite you to keep in mind is that we're like fish in water, and we live in a system today. So and it's so encompassing that it's like talking water to fish. You know, they go, what water? What water? You know, this is normal, and to solve the big problems, the climate change, the misogyny, all that stuff, we need to get out of the system and do something else. And it's going to be a lot of work. The first thing that we say in the book is in the various books is not only self-management, which is I think organizations, there's a lot of striving for that today. There's a lot of talk about it. There's a couple of books out there. But that's like the first tiny step. And the big step is going to be co-ownership, where and I found a video of Steve Jobs, and Steve was talking about early. He was like 26 or something.
Kid.
And he was talking about you don't know things until you taste them, until they become part of you, and you don't know ownership until you own something. And I'm thinking, well, if it's that good for you, wouldn't it be good for everybody else? And that's the step nobody wants to take. Not that nobody wants to take, is that the system does not allow for us to think that way.
Right.
But that's where a lot of the solutions stand, because in the end, I think the difference between individuals and communities for humans, for us people, is the community is everything. You find meaning in a certain community, you find certain different meaning in a certain other community, and that's what needs to change, is a group of people, a community, or something like that. So anyways, that's what I invite you to do, is keep that in mind. But I love the work that you're doing and how you're progressing in terms of using conflict to get to collaboration. That was, when you said that, I went, I'm in love, because that's our thing, is collaboration is what counts. How do you get to it? And if you have somebody that knows how to use conflict to get to collaboration, that's very valuable, very, very valuable. So I thank you for that.
Dawna, thank you. I really appreciate hearing that, because to me, it's so fundamental. It's the difference between thinking we know everything there is to know, which is a common practice, like I already know that, all right, to learning. It's just that simple. I mean, we just need to be able to learn from everything that happens. It's just not that complicated. But in order to do that, instead of having fear about what I might learn, curiosity, Stephen Kotler once said that curiosity, if I remember correctly, curiosity and fear are on the same vibration. So it's like the flip side. So, instead of, being fearful, it would be asking a question. Let me understand this. Instead of coming back with this reaction that positions people over there, they're left, they're Dems, there's a language in the States that I'm Canadian, for those of you who are not aware, but I mean, there's a language in the States that I still don't understand, but it's got to do with all of that, labeling and putting people over in the corner. And, how do you have conversations when you're doing that as a practice? So, I think that that curiosity is, and just the willingness and openness to learn is so central to our evolution.
But that thing that you mentioned about putting people in corners, okay? I call it the edge, but it's the same thing. That's part of the system. That to have wealthy people, and I mean extremely wealthy people, you need the poor. You have to extract that wealth from somewhere. And if you extract it from those people over there, they're the poorest now. They're poor because I'm pulling it all up. So it's systemic, and we have to attack it as a systemic kind of a system. So,
but systems also respond to disruption. I mean, that's why I was so okay. Probably shouldn't say this too loudly, but I was pretty excited when the pandemic hit, because I thought, okay, pattern interrupt. Now we can do cool stuff. We've got an opening, and everyone went out and bought toilet paper, and that was not what I had in mind. I had some other vision in mind. So I mean, these patterns, these interruptions, it doesn't matter whether it's a earthquake or the Earth system. This is how nature innovates as well. It's to create forest fires. Always traditionally were to reset the environment for new growth. And so it's really, I think, fundamentally simple in a certain. I'm not to oversimplify it, but to understand the simplicity of complexity.
Right.
So, Sam's got a question here. Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Sam, I see you've noted the key to productive organizational conflict is psychological safety. I think that's an interesting one, because what people have done is you got to be safe, before you can't say, there's a certain tension around safety, which is silly, because in order to be safe, you have to take risks. You have to be willing to put your foot forward. And I think growth requires some acceptance of risk. I'm going to have to risk certain things if I'm going to grow. Now, if you want to stay stagnant, then of course, stay safe. So I think there's a number of layers that this can happen. And I appreciate the academic research on psychological safety and all the work that's been done, Amy Edmondson and others, on psychological safety. But I've also noticed when I'm facilitating, I used to put up ground rules, and there was always somebody, especially in public contexts, who would just completely ignore them. And you think, okay, well, that's not, that was nice. It was, maybe somebody held self-discipline for 40 minutes, and then all of a sudden they lost it. And so I think it's got more to do with accepting responsibility for keeping others safe. I think that's what psychological safety is to me, as someone who's worked with a lot of high-end conflict in public and organizational settings. It's just saying, I want you to step out of your comfort zone. I want you to think big. I want you to step boldly, lead boldly, and I got your back. It's that sense of belonging. I think, Jose, you mentioned it earlier.
Exactly. I was going to jump right back up to that.
It's just saying, we've got your back.
Yeah. I think Kim, right, Dawna? No, maybe not. But Kim is someone that we've worked in the past. She's done things like conscious contract and so forth. And one of the things that I love about what she's done in her community is she says, what I realized early on when I went out and spoke to people about doing the things in our community of integrative law, I didn't teach them anything. I simply gave them the permission to do what they already wanted to do. Right. And I think that's true in this space of belonging. People already want to help each other. People already want to, be themselves and do the things they want to do. It's just that we don't give each other permission for it.
Yeah.
We don't back each other up. We don't support each other through that process. And so I thank you for your answer to Sam, because I think that's one of the best answers I've heard that feels right to me. We've blown psychological safety out of context. It's something that emerges between us, and we have to support each other through it. And it's not about putting padding all over the place to make everybody feel safe. It's about being there for each other. And that's a very different thing.
It's trust. Fundamentally, it's trust. I trust you're going to have my back. I trust that if we hit a challenging point, we may get it wrong, but we're going to, we're going to work that through. We're going to move through it. Somebody, this was on a personal level, somebody said to me, well, I have a different perspective. And I said, good, let's get in the room and talk about it. And they didn't want to go in because they were playing the battle of perspectives. It was my perspective is winnings over yours. That's pointless. If we're really going to do this adapt to the conditions that we're in and do it well, we have to be able to listen, grok, feel someone else's perspective, and everyone needs to be responsible for it. There's just a whole lot of that's not happening as well, that I think is pretty fundamental to leadership at any level, personal right through to the much wider level.
Well, there's another aspect to safety. There's the thing of, if I'm in a group of equals, then I have to be able to say something and say it and become vulnerable to the rest of the crowd. And you guys have done a great job of that, but there's also a safety of saying the wrong thing in front of the boss.
Yeah, well, you've got the wrong boss then.
because there's consequences to that.
Yeah.
And when people, maybe it's my reading, but a lot of the things that I read about psychological safety has to do with, I'm in the room with the boss and he's got a thing in his nose, and I can't tell that he's got a thing in his nose because he even fired me. So there's that kind of safety as well, which taking responsibility, all you want, it's not going to solve it. So we have to consider that part of it as well.
Yeah, no, I really hear that point well, because we've had facilitations where the group works it all through, that they spend it, and the boss walks in at the end of the day and said, well, you didn't give the answer that I wanted, so come back in tomorrow and do it for 2 more days until you give me what I want. It's like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
So this is what I call the very emotionally, there's a lot of emotionally immature people in authority. And I don't know how they got there, but obviously they were promoted. But so that says something in its own. But when they're there, the onus is to become more responsible from an emotional standpoint. Otherwise, you can't do anything like that. You can't have those conversations that could expose opportunities for growth instead of shrinking it down and trying to stay restricted to or rigid with what's happened already, with what's happened in the past. So yeah, I've heard that before in my work as well. Don't let the boss comes in the room. So I just started using processes that were flat from a power base point of view. It didn't matter who you were, you could participate. And if you didn't agree to that, well, then we didn't do the work I never had that happen. But it had to be there had to be a strong commitment to leveling out the power structure so that people could have power, sharing it in that sense.
Well,
yeah, I'm sure you had experience with this also. It's not just flat in terms of vice president of this and vice president of that and vice president of the other. because these guys are competing. They want to replace the boss when the boss dies or goes away or whatever. So they're competing. So if I say something in front of that guy over there, it may come back and bite me.
So I'm so glad you raised this, because this is the competition at its worst. It's competition driven by what's in it for me, versus competition that is focused on how can we achieve something bigger together than we can by doing it alone. This is where radical purpose comes in, because if you don't have something big to go for, then you're just competing to be in control versus contributing toward achieving something bigger. So it's a complete, what we're describing here is a different focus. It's more of a shared focus on achieving something bigger, instead of all the motivations being driven by, I'm the finest, I'm the best, I'm the boss, I'm in control. I mean, that's just nonsense. It's over that part. We really have to be in control of ourselves so that we can work at achieving something much larger, more radical, from a purpose point of view, purpose-driven point of view.
There you go. Now that's a great last word from Dawna.
Okay, so I'm going to announce that next week we have Alicia Medina, co-founder of Future of Organizing. Oh, there she is. Moving into the future with distributed powers. And I don't know if that's in English or Spanish.
It'll be in English.
You know? In English, okay. And so we'll find out what moving into the future with distributed powers means from Alicia. Okay? That's next week. And I really appreciate, I really like you.
Thank you.
I really like Dawna. She's, I don't know, she's inspiring or something. But knowing that you went through this period of being homeless or whatever, moving around, gives me more respect for everything you've done.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I really enjoy this, and as you were talking, I thought maybe the next book should be with her, because what I'm planning to do is take some topics from the current books and expand them into standalone books, and one in particular is up your skill set. So
I'd love it.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. That'd be
awesome.
fun.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you, Dawna. Thank you very much.